Joining us now, NHL insider from TSN and, of course, from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. You're saying, doesn't Darren Dreger join you Wednesdays routinely? The answer is yes. Tomorrow we will have his podcast mate, Mr. Ferraro, so kindly offered to go a day earlier. How are we doing, Darren?
I'm doing okay. I mean, it's an annual battle, right? You feverishly work up to the trade deadline, and then the trade deadline comes and goes, and normally takes me a couple, if not 3 days, to realize that, okay, I don't have to carpet bomb everybody. I can take a breather and get a little bit of rest, get a little bit of sleep. So I would think by the weekend I'll be fine.
We'll get to the Canucks in particular in just a second, but on the broad, quick first brush here, the tenured players all moved, the Fleuries, the Giordanos, the Giroux of the world. For those that feel like there was still something missing from trade deadline, was it just the fact that we didn't get any superstar guys with term really moved throughout the course of the day?
That's it for me, Blake. I don't know how much I believed that Jake Chychrun of the Arizona Coyotes was going to get traded. It was certainly conceivable, not through lack of interest, but we also knew the restrictions that Billy Armstrong had put in place and how much Arizona needed to get back. If Chychrun had really been in play on Monday, then, that adds a little bit more spice to it, doesn't it? I think that a lot of good players changed hands. And, coming out of the weekend, that was what we were hoping for, was that there was going to be a list of good players that other teams would want. It wouldn't be just a flurry to the last second to add a depth piece. So I think the quality of the number of players traded was decent, but it didn't have the same kind of high-profile appeal.
Yeah, young players or players with term who didn't go were rumored. Zacha, Roslovic, Monahan, Chychrun, DeBrusk, Severson, Marino. There were a number of them. On Jake DeBrusk, Dregs, and just because he had mentioned to us a few weeks ago, maybe there was a fit, Boston and Vancouver, Garland and DeBrusk. He re-signs and yet kept his trade request in with the Bruins and then wasn't moved. What happened there?
Yeah, well, wasn't through lack of interest, to be sure. And, as soon as word broke that Jake DeBrusk had extended with the Boston Bruins, I think it was pretty obvious that everybody went, oh, okay, well, then we've got an old sign and trade type of routine unfolding here. And again, there were a number of teams. I believe Winnipeg was in there. How deeply, I can't be certain, but there were a number of teams that were trying to pry Jake DeBrusk from the Boston Bruins, but obviously Don Sweeney didn't get what he needed to facilitate that deal. And, Jake DeBrusk, his second half in Boston, certainly better than his first half. So he's hoping, of course, that he can have a strong finish, maybe help the Boston Bruins win a Stanley Cup, and they can revisit his future in the offseason.
Let's drill down on the Vancouver Canucks here a little bit. And I think a mixed report card, although I would say favorable for a lot of people as well. Hamonic deal unequivocally got the round of applause, I think, from Canucks fans. The disappointment maybe lies in the Mott return. How did the vast majority of you there on the panels view the Canucks activity?
Yeah, I think it was expected, to be fair. I don't know if that's the case in Vancouver. The market was probably hoping for a little bit, more pizzazz to it. But I think that we talked about and established that it was unlikely Allvin and Jimmy Rutherford were going to do anything drastic or dramatic with those big pieces, right? So I wasn't overly surprised. Interesting to me, the reception of Travis Hamonic in Ottawa. You guys pay close attention to what the media was saying there. I'm sure, wasn't well received to a point. Pierre Dorion had to come out and defend that trade. I think what happened to Tyler Mott, and he landed in a great spot with the New York Rangers, he kind of got caught a little bit in some of the other stuff that was going on. Andrew Kopp also goes to the New York Rangers from Winnipeg. And I'm not saying that Tyler Mott would have been in the same conversation with Andrew Kopp, but as we've talked about in the last couple of episodes here, there is that layering effect, right? Where teams shoot for the moon and, maybe they're looking at Andrew Kopp or they're trying to wrestle away Jake DeBrusk. They're looking for a better forward than Tyler Mott. And then they get to the place where they're like, all right, well, he's a real good energy guy, can help us out on the fourth line, good character, all of those things. So let's close the book on this late leading up to the trade deadline. And I think that's what happened. I think the New York Rangers were in on Tyler Mott, but they were balancing, the ongoing negotiation of what turned out to be an incredibly complex deal with Winnipeg to acquire Andrew Kopp as well. So things got a little muddied there.
Patrick Allvin yesterday was asked, were you close to anything big, and did not answer. It would have been easy to say, no. What do you know about how close they were on anything bigger than Tyler Mott or the trade of the Travises?
Right. I honestly don't have a firm answer for you either. And I wish I did. Certainly not as juicy as what didn't happen between Toronto and Chicago and that multi-piece deal. Look, when you've got players like JT Miller and Brock Boeser and Connor Garland and some others who have been chewed on just endlessly, in rumor after rumor after rumor and speculation leading up to the deadline, despite the fact that the Vancouver Canucks made it clear they likely weren't going to move those pieces. Look, teams are going to call. There was a suspicion that maybe the New York Rangers went back at Vancouver on JT Miller, but to be fair, I didn't verify that. So I'm not presenting that as insider information or even factual for that matter. It was lobbed at me from another team, another source, but it obviously wasn't anything that the Vancouver Canucks considered seriously.
Is this a general manager and presidential team that will be hard at work in the summer based on what didn't get accomplished then?
I think so. But that's not to say that they don't value or have time for those players, but there's a lot of roster work that needs to get done. There's a lot of business work that needs to get done from Vancouver's perspective. You've got the daunting qualifying offer from Brock Boeser. I think JT Miller has proven that the Vancouver Canucks, are a good home for him. So I don't know why Vancouver would really, truly entertain moving him unless, a team steps up and makes an offer that they just have to consider. I'm not projecting or predicting that's going to happen. He's been such a dominant player for the Vancouver Canucks that they're seeing the other side of that. So I think those usual suspects, maybe throw Myers into the mix now, because keep in mind, as we know, as the agent JP Barry has reminded us, the trade protection on Tyler Myers changes in the offseason, right? It goes to a modified no trade. So you might see more speculation around him as well.
Yeah, him and Pearson. We heard they were wondering if there were any takers on him and Pearson, and then we're going to go back to the players at all if there was enough on the trade clauses. But you're right, both of them move and become more tradable. Both those no trade clauses diminish and they become more tradable in the summer.
Yeah.
Darren, you mentioned something to us, I guess it was about 6 weeks ago. It was for sure easily a month ago or so, where we asked you what's going on with the Rutherford trade, Hopper and whatnot. And he said, guys, I think Jim's got a pretty big chore getting all his different deputies up to speed in their current job and then bringing this new group together and getting them all working collaboratively, because so many are new, so many are in positions that they have never held before. Do you think that held them back from doing anything at this deadline? Did you get any sense that maybe they were a little bit more passive just because of it's such a new group, people new in their positions and haven't had a lot of time together?
No, I don't think that hampered them at all. I don't. I think for the most part, they accomplished what they thought they were going to accomplish. I mean, again, the market, the media, maybe we wanted them to be more aggressive than what they were planning on being. And that just wasn't going to be their reality, unless there were deals presented that they weren't expecting. Now, I mean, look, I think that Jim Rutherford, made sure that Patrick Allvin had enough space to navigate, negotiate, and then ultimately execute trades. No doubt that Jimmy was involved in a process, and no doubt that, he would have, given his consent, whether it was needed or not. I mean, that's just respect to the hockey operations department, the fact that Jimmy is the head of hockey operations in Vancouver. But I did get the sense that it was all hands on. And I would extend that and say their developing analytics department was also heavily involved. And it wouldn't it obviously doesn't come down to the negotiation when you're involving your analytics people, but they're working on bigger parameters of a deal, right? So Allvin or Jimmy might send a player's name. What do you guys think? And then that group chews it up and they determine whether they see the right fit, or that group would create a list of players that analytically they feel would complement the Vancouver Canucks moving forward. And they'd submit that to Patrick Allvin and to Jimmy Rutherford. And, if they make some calls on those players, great. I got the sense that the entire hockey operations department was entirely immersed and hands-on, not just yesterday, but leading up to the deadline as well.
Do you think there's a world in which they explore trading names that we thought were carved in here for a while, like Tyler Myers, like Oliver Ekman-Larsson? I mean, these were not by Allvin or Rutherford's pen that these contracts were signed. Do they get creative to extricate themselves, and might they be best off to try to do that while there's still some useful years left in both of those defensemen, or do you think they try to use up the useful years of those defensemen before they get desperate?
I think that they're open for anything hockey related. And I know that sounds like, a bit of a dismissive answer, and I don't mean it to be. I don't think it has much to do with, whose property they are in terms of Allvin and Jim Rutherford, not bringing in the likes of Ekman-Larsson or not being associated with Tyler Myers. I think that they look at those players and they see the contracts, they see the fit on their team, and then ultimately decide that, okay, well, these are pieces that we need to build around, or these are pieces that we can't really build a future around. So let's try and move them out. And I don't really have a hard read on which direction that's going to go. I would say this. I don't think that Allvin or Rutherford closed the door on anything, without, with the exception of some of the obvious, right? They're not trying to get older. They're trying to get younger to a point. So they're going to want to freshen up. So I can appreciate why you would bring those two guys up. I would have no reason to believe that they wouldn't have interest in moving either one of those players. Somebody, again, gives the call and says, hey, would you consider doing this at the draft? And it includes Tyler Myers or it includes Oliver Ekman-Larsson. I mean, just, again, purely from a management perspective, where the Vancouver Canucks are and where they intend to be for the start of next season, I think they'd consider it. But I don't know how aggressively at this point, looking at the draft, looking at the offseason, they're going to push those two names.
Who are your sources saying did well or poorly, or which trade in particular is on the lips and minds of NHL decision makers today?
I mean, it's a good question. I think, let's look beyond what happened yesterday. Minnesota did pretty well, I would say, when you look at the haul that they brought in, including Marc-Andre Fleury. But beyond that, again, honorable mention yesterday to the New York Rangers for Kopp and Mott and Justin Braun. The two Florida teams really improved their rosters, I think. And that wasn't yesterday. That was leading up to the deadline. I mean, the appetite to win Stanley Cups in Tampa Bay is off the charts. I mean, they're throwing out first-round picks on somewhat unproven players like Brandon Hagel, but they're doing it because they just believe that they can win 3, maybe they can win 4 consecutive Stanley Cups. You've got an arms race in Florida, and I think Billy Zito and the Panthers did pretty well in response in bringing in Sherratt and in bringing in Claude Giroux. So there were a number of teams that improved. The Calgary Flames are a top contender. They didn't do much at or near the deadline, but they added Yarncroke and they earlier added Tyler Toffoli. They're a better team. So there wasn't anything splashy on trade deadline day, but I would say there's probably a half a dozen, maybe as many as 8 teams that most definitely improved leading up to the deadline.
Yeah, the Fleury trade was interesting because, of course, Minnesota, he's willing to go to Minnesota. And as you mentioned, the dispute between the young GMs, Kyle, yesterday.
Yeah, Mr. Stir It Up here, Darren Dreger.
How about that?
Did you think that you were wading into that when you tweeted out that information?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it is a bit of a dangerous game, not from my perspective, but you know, every year there are trades that didn't happen.
Yes.
At some point we'll probably learn that, Claude Giroux was, offered to Colorado, maybe elsewhere, and as he's identified, Florida was the only place he would go. All right, well, what did the Colorado offer look like? You play that type of game. Based on the magnitude of the Chicago-Toronto trade possibility, that's what intrigued me. I mean, when you're talking about Fleury, Marc-Andre Fleury, and Brandon Hagel to the Toronto Maple Leafs for a couple of first-round draft picks, Peter Mrazek, Matthew Nyes, who is apparently a blue-chip prospect. I mean, this kid is supposed to be really, really good. All right, my antenna went up. And, I had at least 4 sources on that. So I knew it would jazz the market. Of course I did. But I didn't expect that Kyle Dubas would respond the way he did in taking a shot at Kyle Davidson and the Chicago Blackhawks. So that's going to make things a little bit juicier going into the general managers meetings early next week in Florida.
And I'll remind everybody that interpersonal relations between Kyle Dubas and Kyle Davidson is not Darren Dreger's job nor concern.
No.
We love hearing about the ones that didn't happen, especially the big ones.
I would feel more sorry for Kyle Dubas if Jack Campbell was like a 3-time Vezina winner that had been with the team for 10 years, that like preserving his feelings might be the top order. I mean, Campbell is trying to prove that he belongs in the NHL on a regular basis, not necessarily in the place to be calling shots here for the Toronto Maple Leafs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and look, his focus has to be on getting back in the crease and being better.
Yes.
Likewise for Peter Mrazek. The Toronto Maple Leafs cannot concern themselves with hurting feelings at this stage. I mean, they weren't able to do anything to improve their goaltending, and they were pretty honest about why that was. I mean, they had other fish to fry, and they brought in some big pieces in doing that. So they need Jack Campbell and Peter Mrazek to be the tandem that is going to take them past the first round. And if they're not, then they'll have to address goaltending in the offseason.
We were just, we were amused because it's the 36-year-old general manager scolding the 33-year-old general manager on procedure
code
from those
GM
and
code.
they're both named Kyle, and they both the KD is the initial. So, anyways, good little bit of fun there. Dregs, thanks for your time here and for switching dates on us. We'll catch up next Wednesday, my friend.
You bet. Darren
Dreger, everybody, are normally a Wednesday regular for us, but was kind enough to move to Tuesday to unpack trade deadline. We'll have Ferraro tomorrow
good for Dregs. I'm glad Dregs wasn't like apologizing to the nth degree there about starting all this.
You've got it from 4 sources, and it's that, like, as he said, with that many moving parts and involving 2 markets and involving really a 4 markets, because Minnesota winds up getting Fleury and Tampa gets
it's a good scoop.
Hagel.
It's
a
good
really
story.
good story. Absolutely. And frankly, I see Dubas is pissed not just because of the Campbell thing, because now he has to go. Dubas is also pissed, Blake, because if their goaltending goes to pot in the first round, it's going to be like, he tried to fix it, but he wouldn't pay the price that Chicago wanted on the deal, and that's why we had to play this goaltender who wasn't good enough.
Yeah. How about you just
that's sort of but frankly, Blake, like, those are the real life decisions that general managers make.
Yeah.
Like, it's a window into the honesty, into the truth of what happens in NHL front offices. And that saying, sometimes the best deals you make are the ones you don't. Sometimes the ones that get away cost you, your team, and others. And sometimes they cost jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.